with respect to prevention of falls and other things that people can do to avoid slip and fall in the wintertime. And I guess people think that I'm into exercise, which I am as an athlete. I've been an athlete my whole life. I've participated in winter triathlon, represented Canada in that sport, and also in ski orienteering, which is another winter sport. So I've had to stay warm, and I find now that I'm over 60, it's much worse. Just with normal human aging, trying to keep that temperature up. Boy, it changed in the last 20 years, and it's just getting worse, trying to stay warm. But part of the reason why we tend to be colder as we get older, and also the same thing's true with all sorts of muscle disorders. When you lose muscle mass, the muscle is really the main generator of heat in your body. So it's the most metabolically active tissue. And what's interesting, you've probably seen over the years when people look at overweight folks, they say, wow, they've got lots of insulation. I bet they're really warm. The problem is that fat, although it does have some insulating properties, doesn't generate heat. So generally, if you recall in high school, it's probably the skinnier, more muscly people that generated more heat. And it is actually your skeletal muscle that's your main heat generator. So body fat really doesn't have a positive effect and probably not a negative effect on heat, but certainly it's the skeletal muscle. The other issue too is that when we're at rest versus maximal exercise, the amount of energy used by our muscles can increase, 30, 35 fold. And extracting energy is a very inefficient process. And the side effect of that, or the byproduct, is heat. So anytime we move, anytime we contract our muscles, we generate heat. So there's two main reasons that we've seen for myotonic, FSH, and all of the different muscle disorders that's an issue. Decrease in muscle mass. So the total furnace that you have to generate energy goes down. And number two, if you have weakness, you don't contract the muscle. If you don't contract the muscle, you don't generate as much heat. So certainly in the muscles in the shoulder girdle, the paraspinal region, front aspect of your feet, some of the muscles that are most affected with FSH, if they're smaller and they're not contracting, they don't generate heat. So those areas in particular tend to get cooler faster. So I guess one of the things first to think about is how do we turn on that furnace? Well, certainly one of the things that one can do, which is the ultimate goal of any treatment in FSH, is to increase muscle mass. Now, obviously the disease is fighting against you to shrink your muscles, but certainly we know that exercise is beneficial, both to maintain muscle mass, but also when you're doing physical activity, you're generating heat. So we have a paper that we're working on now where we've looked at our patients in the clinic who exercise 3 times a week or more, and those that exercise less than once per week. And we have quantitative data in our fancy strength testing device, nice $150,000 machine, which tells us exactly how strong the arms and legs are. And what we found was a 3% drop in leg strength and a 2% drop in arm strength. And this is across all levels of strength in FSH patients, from those who have minimal weakness right down to those with quite severe weakness. If you exercise more than 3 times per week, we preserved muscle mass quite well in both the arms and the legs, and strength, which is really the important metric in those who exercise. It was around a 3 to 4% drop in both the arm and leg strength. In contrast, in the lower extremities, what we found in those who didn't exercise was a 26% drop, and in the upper extremities, a 28% drop over a 10-year period. So clearly, over a long period of time, trying to stay active will help to maintain muscle mass, and overall, that's going to help you to generate a little bit more heat. The other thing, of course, when we go out in the winter, if it's cold, is if you're doing activity, you're obviously going to generate more heat than if you're not doing activity. So that's, pretty straightforward, simple stuff. A few other tricks that one can do is when we eat, eating process itself is inefficient when we're digesting food. And there's a process called the thermic effect of food. And the thermic effect of food is the heat that we generate when we're digesting food. So if one's going out with a friend for a walk or doing something outside, if you've had some food that you've consumed half an hour to an hour before you go out, you will be generating heat just from the simple digestion process. And that's called the thermic effect of food. And it is greatest with proteins versus carbohydrates and fat. So, having some sort of protein an hour to an hour and a half before you go out will help you to generate some heat. So other things that we can talk about generating heat, actually more preserving heat, is what do you wear when you go outside? So I've got a whole bunch of things that one can think about. And I've just got some notes here to go through everything so I don't miss anything. And we can certainly ask questions as we're going. So perhaps one of the things that we'll start with is we'll start from our feet and work our way up. So the first thing is obviously having good quality boots in the wintertime. And one of the things that I just looked up, which I saw just last week, is a special thing on the bottom of boots, which can help you from a slip and fall. So it's called ICE FX. So ICE and FX. And this is a patented rubber that you can get on the bottom of your shoes. And in Canada, we have something called Mark's Work Warehouse, but it sells all of the popular brands. And I think it's Merrill and a few others have this on the bottom. So what it is on the sole is little bits of glass, if you can believe it, which are in the bottom of the sole. And what that does is when you step on black ice, and normally you'd slip and fall and hurt yourself, this seriously decreases the slip and fall risk on ice. So I would strongly advise, and we tell all of our patients, when you go out, and myself as an older adult, even though I'm an athlete, I've slipped and fallen every year 2 or 3 times in the winter. No matter how strong you are, how fit you are, how good your balance, if you hit black ice and you slip and fall, the challenge, of course, with our patients with weakness and balance problems is you're more likely to go down and hurt yourself. So these ICE FX, that's capital F, little x, boots, I'm sure they're available throughout the US. They're definitely available at Mark's Work Warehouse in Canada. And I don't know if they have that in the US. Now, there's other things that you can put on the bottom of your shoes as well. The most popular of which is called YAK, Y-A-K, tracks, T-R-A-X. So YAK tracks fit onto any shoe or boot. They're fairly easy to pull on, slip on that goes in the bottom of your shoe. And they've got a little spiral metal thing which helps to keep you from slipping and falling on ice. They're probably better in hard packed snow. They're good, but not quite as good as these ICE FX boots on ice, but certainly a lot better than just a regular boot or a regular shoe when you go out. So prevention of slip and fall, really important. And those are 2 tricks that we certainly have worked with our patients to help to try and decrease fall risk. The other thing in the winter is for some people who have a peripheral neuropathy. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. It's a situation that happens as we get older, where the small nerves in our feet can degenerate, and that makes it harder to feel the cold. So as we get older, some of you may or may not have peripheral neuropathy. That's going to make it harder to feel the cold. The other thing that happens is that with FSH, in many patients, the muscle on the front of our shin gets thinner. That's called your tibialis anterior, which is why some people can have a foot drop. But if you think about it, if those muscles going down to your feet, think of this as my foot, if they're thinner, we have less warming of the blood going down and back, so feet tend to get colder. So for your feet, get a good quality set of boots, and of course, if it's going to be wet out, make sure it has Gore-Tex or some other waterproof coating on the outside. Now, on your feet, we don't want your feet to get wet, because when you sweat in your shoe, and if it stays against your foot, excuse me, if it's cold, you tend to get ice development and it gets colder. So this is what I wore because I just froze my butt off coming home from work. I'd forgotten about this talk, and I thought it was at 6. So I whipped home on my bike, but I didn't have very good winter stuff. So I fortunately had 1 pair of these socks. So these are called Smart Wool socks. I don't know if you can see the Smart Wool, but this is a brand called Merino, M-E-R-I-N-O. And I recommend this to all of our patients. And indeed, we use this for running, trail running, skiing, etc. This is a merino wool, which is very soft. And what it does is it wicks the sweat away from your feet so that you don't get those cold, clammy feet, which tend to get colder. So I would strongly recommend buying a pair or several pairs of what are called merino wool socks. Smart Wool brand is available everywhere throughout the world. This happens to be my favorite brand, Smart Wool. And they come in 3 different thicknesses. A thinner one that you can use for the spring, summer, and fall, a midweight one, and a very thick one. This one here is a midweight one. If it gets down below -10 Celsius, I would wear the thicker ones, but keep in mind the thicker they get, you'll have to have a slightly larger boot. So make sure that it fits. Merino wool socks are available at any good running shoe store. And in Canada, we have a store called Sale. and Mountain Equipment Co-op. In the US, REI is an excellent source for these type of socks. Now, merino wool comes in Smart Wool, and there's a variety of other brands. Smart Wool is just the brand, but merino wool is what you would ask for because there's 5 or 6 different brands. So definitely on your feet. That, again, the Ice FX boots and Yak Tracks I would consider as well because they fit over pretty much any shoe. So if you could put them in your backpack, you could have them at work in case you come out from work and it happens to have snowed and it's slippery. You can just slip on your Yak Tracks when you go outside. Very, very important point, however, when you come in from the cold and you go, let's say at work, we've got a very hard floor, take your Yak Tracks off, because although they'll decrease your slip and fall outside on snow and hard packed surfaces and ice even, they will be more slippery when you come inside. So make sure you take your Yak Tracks off when you come inside so you don't slip and fall there. So why don't we stop there from the foot perspective before I move on, see if anyone has questions so I don't go through everything and then people are saying, I wanted to ask you something earlier. So any questions on a couple of things that I've said so far?
I just wanted to bring up, this has been happening to me quite a while. I'm glad we had this topic today. I find myself like I'll be in like my friend's house. I go out and get my car, and if it's cold, I'll like start to shake and shiver so bad that it's like almost scary. Like I just, I don't know. I guess I don't really have a question. I'm just trying to see, does anybody else get that same thing where you just kind of like, I don't know, it's like almost scary the way you just start shaking, you get so cold. I can't wait for the heat to get on in the car, you know.
Oh yeah. And even, as an able-bodied person, but someone who's over 60 myself, there's no question that I feel that big time. And, I turn the seat heater on, but I'm freezing and shaking for, 5 or 6 minutes before the seat heater comes on. So if you can afford it, make sure you get good quality seat heaters in your car, number one. Now that doesn't help you because it takes 5 minutes. So that 5 minutes that you're saying, when you go inside the car. So, layer up before you go outside. And definitely what I've realized as I get older is normally I wouldn't think twice about just jumping in my car. I wouldn't have gloves on. I wouldn't have a hat on. But when you get in the car, before you go from your friend's house into the car, put a hat on for sure. Put on gloves, because certainly myself, when I grab that cold steering wheel, instantly I chill down. And it just sucks the heat right out of your hands. And for me, I also get Raynaud's phenomenon where your hands start to go white. So definitely put gloves on before you go out. Put a hat on. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about layering too in just a minute, just to keep that core warm, especially with FSH when, the biceps in some people, triceps, and also your shoulder girdle is thinner. You're going to get cold in this region here. So make sure you've got a nice, good jacket that's keeping that core warm. So I really like vests, and I definitely tend to wear a vest whenever I go and give a talk. I find now I have to wear a vest just to keep my core warm. Because in most air-conditioned buildings, even still, I start to get cold. So I like to have that vest on. So I'd invest definitely in a vest. They now have very thin vests. Actually, let me just show you one here. So again, this is also for Chip Wilson, helping to advertise his new company. As you know, he started Lululemon and has FSH dystrophy, and that's not confidential. It's on the web. But this is a company called Arc'teryx. So there's a number of brands like this, but Arc'teryx has very good quality stuff. This is something I keep always in. I just came back from Europe. So this is a very lightweight jacket that you can wear, incredibly warm, but it weighs just a few ounces. The other interesting thing here is this little pouch. What you do with it is you just bunch it right up like this. I'll just throw it in here quickly. But I had this with me when I went to Europe because it was colder than I expected. This tiny little thing, I'll just push it right in here. There it is. So you can see how small that is, and that weighs just a few ounces. But this is, down to probably -5 Celsius. This is really almost all you need. But what I would do is if you get one of these, it's almost about this size. It's about 2/3 the size for the vest form of this. And this little pouch fits in the pocket. So you can just easily pop this in a knapsack or something and warm yourself up before you go outside. put on your vest. But this is certainly, so many companies are making these super lightweight down things. So they're definitely made for athletes and for the outdoors, but they're wonderful things for, anyone who wants to stay warm.
Okay, there's two things. What was the name of that company that you just mentioned?
Arc'teryx is the company.
A-R-K?
A-R-C.
Yeah.
T-E-R-Y-X.
Okay. And the second thing with feet, dealing with feet and balance in the wintertime is for people using a cane, or I've been using side sticks, arm crutches, is to put on the ice pick attachments.
Right. I'm going to get into that in just a minute. And I've actually, it's a good thing I went home because I got all my stuff. So we are huge fans of something called trekking poles, T-R-E-K-K-I-N-G. So this is a trekking pole. This is just one brand here called Black Diamond. This is ultra light. So the nice thing about this is this literally weighs a few ounces. And why that's important is if you have any weakness, you don't want to have a heavy pole. And a classic cane is a piece of junk. I'm sorry, they all should be thrown out. So those old wooden canes that you see are the most useless piece of junk in the world. They're heavy, they're slippery, and the pick on the bottom is garbage. And so that little pick that supposedly slides on in the wintertime, it's not made of carbide. So when you hit ice with that, it'll slip. If you put it on concrete, the second or third time you hit concrete, it'll already be dull. So when you're buying these, which I strongly recommend for every person with locomotor disability, a trekking pole, on the end here, I don't know if people can see it, this is a carbide tip. So make sure C-A-R-B-I-D-E. So this little tip here, these poles probably have 800 kilometers on them. And this tip will still stick into ice, and this tip will stick into rocks. So this is a carbide tip. That's what you want on the end. If you buy a pair that are 30 or 35 bucks, it's going to be cheap steel, and they're going to slip and fall, and you're going to kill yourself. They're horrible. A carbide will last for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. Now with this, just like wearing your yak tracks inside, this will slip on a very hard surface inside, like, the slippery sort of marble floors. So what you do is any good quality pole like this one comes with a little rubber tip that you put on the end. So when you go inside, you put the rubber tip on, and when you go outside, you pop the rubber tip off, and then you have carbide on the bottom. So the nice thing about this, it is incredibly light. I'll just show you another feature too. Not so much with FSH because hands are usually fairly well preserved, but we have a lot of folks like myotonic dystrophy or the sporadic inclusion body myopathy where the hands are weak. You don't need a strong hand with this, but if you think about it, if you have to hold on to a slippery cane, you need a good hand strength. Now with a pole like this, and all trekking poles will have it, it'll have a handle like this. So what you do is you put your hand through it like that, and then you hold it like this. So what this does is you don't have to use force to hold the pole or to hold yourself up. I'll just show you here. What I'm doing, even with my hand wide open here, I still will get full force through this pole. So from the side here, when I'm walking, if I go to fall, then I don't even need to grip the pole because it's really hard to grip a pole to prevent yourself from falling, but this will keep me from falling, just this grip here. So remember what most people do, I see them when they're skiing, they go like this and they hold onto a pole. This is totally useless. What you do is you go up and down like this, and you can adjust the pole to fit your hand, and you can widen it if you've got a big mitt on. Now, for any trekking pole, any cane or any walker, you need to have, I'll just show you with my skinny little muscles. This muscle here is called your tricep. And with FSH, usually it's the periscapular muscles, then the bicep, and eventually the tricep. If your tricep is too weak that you can't push down, a cane, walker, or trekking poles probably won't work very well for you because you need to have some strength here in your tricep. So as long as you can push with your arm, push out, then a trekking pole, cane, or a walker might be helpful for you. I say throw the cane out, and some people do need a walker, which we'll talk about in a minute, but certainly bilateral trekking poles, I just have one in my hand here, but you usually buy them as two. especially with the asymmetry for FSH and for balance issues. I like to have two of them because if you fall and you only have one, nice thing about two is it helps you from a balance perspective. And this thing is uber light. And you might say, okay, it's light, it's a piece of junk, it's not going to last. This trekking pole has 800K in it. We do what's called adventure racing, and we've done stage races through the mountains. And I did, 120 miles this summer with my daughter through the Sierra Nevada mountains. This hit rocks, bounced, got stuck in cracks. And even though it is super light, it's made of carbide, and it's almost impossible to break this thing. And the other neat thing too, for most of these, they'll fold up. And this one's really cool. You just press a little button here and it folds up really small. So the nice thing about this is it can fit in your purse. It can fit in a backpack. And then what you do is very simply, you just open it up like this and locks in. And now I've got myself trekking poles. So I would strongly recommend that every person in the world should have one of these. They're great for going out and getting some fitness. You've probably seen people on rail trails walking with them, the so-called Nordic walking. And there's a number of brands. This one's called Black Diamond, particularly light. This is the one that we use. The other big brand is Leki, L-E-K-I. And Leki is a very good quality brand as well. So any good sports store, like I say, REI, Mountain Equipment Co-op, Sale, any of those places will have it. They even have it at some Costco's as well. But make sure at a Costco, you've got a good carbide tip on the end, and also check out the weight. Now, a good pair like this, which is going to last you for your entire life, is going to cost around $130 for the top end pole. So they may seem a little expensive, but this, cheap buggers pay twice. If you buy something good, you're going to love it. It's going to be high quality. It's going to work for you, and it's going to last you for the rest of your life. Versus you get a cheap one and you're not going to enjoy it. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to definitely, as you can tell, I've got my props already here ready to go. That's a nice trekking pole.
So I've used those for 8.5 years, and they have very, very lightweight and very good. So
yeah, there's a variety of brands. Just look for lightweight, carbon fiber, I should say, is usually the lightest. Make sure you've got a cover on the end as well of your carbide tip, and make sure you use your handles correctly. Most people don't. You have to put your hand up and then down. Yeah, good.
all right.
So let's go from the feet to the head, because I've got some stuff for the head here. So one of the things, and again, I've seen different studies saying, oh, it said I was on mute. I've seen different studies saying that you lose 20 or 30% of your heat through your head. Certainly, I know if I don't have a hat on, I get cold quickly. So definitely covering your head is really important. And you probably see a lot of people from a fashion perspective wearing hats inside now just to stay warm. So there's a variety of different types of hats. Make sure you cover your ears with your hat. Make sure they fit well. Not much more to say about a hat, but I do want to bring up this thing here. So this is called a buff, B-U-F-F. So today, I went for a run with my wife. I had my hat on, but it was about -6 this morning. Isn't too cold, but I put the buff on. So with the buff, it's a tube essentially. And so just today, I wore it like this around my neck, because I find that even though my coat comes up to here and my hat comes down, it's this area here that stays exposed to the cold. And I find I really get cold when my neck's exposed. So the nice thing about a buff is you can just pull it up like this, and it really keeps your neck warm. Now, what we do, I'll just show you in a minute. I got some other props here. So when it gets really cold, what we do is we take the buff like this, pull it up over your head. I'm Ukrainian. I look like a nice babushka. So you pull it over like this. And then what you do is you then put your hat on top. So the nice thing with this is it really keeps you warm in the winter. And if it's really, really dry and cold, you can even pull this up over your nose like this to keep your face warm. But that's certainly something. And also with FSH dystrophy, as you know, it's the lower part of the face that tends to lose the muscle mass. And so you're not generating as much heat. So sometimes just pulling a buff up like this over your face is helpful too, just keep the face warm. So that's when it's really cold. A buff is wonderful. The other thing about a buff as well, they're uber light, about 20, 24 bucks. My daughter wears it as a headband. And there's all sorts of other little things you can do with it. You can actually wear it, pull it up. You can tie it off, even like almost like an emergency hat, but they're very inexpensive, called a buff, B-U-F-F. And you've probably seen these things before. We probably have 100 of these things kicking around from races and stuff, but they're lightweight, but boy, they make such a difference keeping your head warm so you don't lose that heat through your head. And any questions about head buffs, staying warm on the head before we move on to the hands? No? Okay, good. So for the hands too, I have a thing called Raynaud's phenomenon, where if I touch something cold, or especially if I touch metal, my fingers will go white, and it's almost impossible to warm the darn things up. So I really have to look after my fingers. And when you're driving, Scott was mentioning too, when you get in the car, if you touch that steering wheel and it's freezing cold, that really affects your hand. Oh, so in terms of your hands, obviously there's a variety of different gloves that one can use. Gloves are generally the coolest. They tend to provide not much warmth as it gets colder and colder, but they do give you more mobility with your fingers. That's the advantage of gloves. Now, they do have gloves out there now that are thicker, where you can go down to about -10 Celsius. Everyone's a little different in your tolerance. These are a reasonably thick glove, but they do give me a bit more dexterity. But when it gets really cold, usually people will move more to a mitt. Now, with gloves too, there's all sorts of options. You can get Gore-Tex on the back of them, and they even have gloves now that are heated. So if you really have problems, we actually have one that I bought that's got a little battery here. They're very expensive, about $200, and the battery will keep your hands warm. So that's one thing you can do if you like gloves. But if you want to get warmer and it's colder out, the next thing would be what's called a claw. So this is called a lobster claw for obvious reasons. So this is the next level of warmth. It's a lobster claw type of glove. Still gives you a little bit of what separates us from the lower, from non-primates, is that opposition of the finger. So it's nice from that perspective. Whereas if this was a full mitt, it's just harder to manipulate things, but a full mitt is the warmest. This is the second warmest type of option. It's called a lobster claw, which is quite a nice little option here. So the other thing for the hands as well that I do because of my Raynaud's phenomenon, and if you really find that your hands get cold in spite of all of this, there are little heaters that you've probably seen. Again, I don't know if you guys have Cabela's or Bass Pro shops in the US. Certainly in Canada, we have those different outdoor stores. So what you can do is get a 24-pack of heaters. So there's ones for the toes and there's ones for the fingers. What you do is you just peel them open, shake them to the air, in about 5 minutes, they will warm up. And what I do is I usually put it in my hand here when I'm out. And then if my hands are really cold, I can just hold onto it and warm my fingers up. So those are nice too, those little heaters. So I'd probably keep some in the glove compartment too, just in case, you find that you're out, it gets colder than you expect, and you're not quite ready. You can put toe heaters in and hand heaters. Again, 24-pack at Cabela's, Bass Pro, any outdoor store will have those things. They're way cheaper at an outdoor store like Cabela's or something. And we have a thing called Canadian Tire in Canada. I'm sure you have stores like that where you can get them. Because if you go to a sort of a high-end sports store, they'll charge you twice as much for them. Oh, heaters for the toes, heaters for the hands, different styles of gloves you can wear. Any questions on gloves and those sort of issues? No?
So one thing I use the heaters, I find that keeping the core warm is also important. Like they're like woolen belly bands that I don't know if they have them here in Japan. That's a big thing. Like keep your belly warm and but they fold, and I can put the heaters. Like this is great for going skiing or you're outside, and I put the little heater things in the belly band. That's
definitely is another thing that you can do for sure. So we've done the feet, we've done the head, we've done the hands. Any other questions on those before we move on? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that there are steering wheels that are heated in some cars, and it's the first thing that heats up the most quickly. That's a real advantage if you have that. The other thing was a question just about how the body gets cold. I mean, you talk about the muscle and the warming of the blood. Very early on, before I knew anything, I got that freezing, shivering that Scott was talking about when I would go swimming in rather warm water, and the people around me were going, "You're ridiculous. That's warm water. Why are you freezing?" I thought it had a lot to do with your bones sensing the cold, that you didn't have the insulation of the muscle mass keeping your bones warm. So is that a misconception?
Yeah, it's a misconception, but a couple of great points that you're bringing up. Number one, think about how warm our bodies are, 98.6 degrees, right? So how often do you go in water that's more than 90 degrees? It's almost impossible. So what happens is you go into water that's 90 degrees, right there, you are losing heat to that water. And a 90-degree pool is hot. But if you sat in a 90-degree pool for a long period of time, you would eventually start getting cold because the pool is cooler than your body, which is 98.6, right? So I know myself, oh my God, I hate the cold water. And my buddies are fine, but for me, within 2 minutes, and maybe it is because I'm a little bit thinner, the cold goes right through me. So what's happening is that my surface area is big relative to my body mass, so you can dissipate that heat very quickly. And I think that is an issue with many patients too, is that, you've got these thinner arms and, your body surface area is still fairly large relative to the muscle mass. So you're just losing heat very, very rapidly. So certainly, in the winter, you're not going to jump in the water, but, I would definitely say, use one of those wetsuits and those sort of things, which they didn't have when I was young. I tried to do a triathlon once, and, the water was like 78 degrees, and I thought I was going to die. I was shaking for almost an hour afterwards. It was so darn cold. But yeah, be really, really careful in the water because, like even 80 degrees, you can still feel cold in that water because it's different than what your body temperature is. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious if you had any suggestions for indoor gloves. My hands get really cold, like working on my computer. Like if there's any nice lightweight indoor gloves that give you still enough dexterity to be able to still function.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. I know myself too, in my office, my fingers do get cold. And when you touch almost like Mac computers, for example, are metal, so they will be quite cold. And I find that my fingers get cold as well. I don't have time really to run downstairs because I don't know exactly where they are, but my daughter is a rock climber. So there are gloves that she wears that are really thin, and I use them now for carpentry and stuff. And they've got reasonable sort of rubberish tips on the end. So you can get dexterity. You can feel your keyboard, for example, and you can pick things up. But there's just enough to give your hands that warmth. The problem with, I don't know if you've seen those silver lining things that you can put inside your gloves. They're very, very slippery. So you couldn't hold on to a pen. You couldn't do anything. But these new rock climbing gloves have a light sort of rubber on the outside. You can also, I've seen them in Home Depot, for example. So for people who are, doing carpentry and construction, there's very thin gloves that you can wear with a really light rubberish pad on them. Those would be great to wear because you could type on the computer, you could feel everything with your fingers, and it's going to give you just enough to prevent that cold feeling inside. If you fire me an email too. What's that?
Some have sensitivity to touch screens too, that they're sold that way, that you can then, while you're wearing, you don't have to take your glove off to respond on a touch screen. Yeah,
you can definitely get those too. They're a little more expensive, but the ones I think I saw them in Home Depot. It was a 6-pack, and they were like $10. They're really inexpensive, so you can have a pair kicking around the house. Yeah.
Hey, just going to what she was saying. My friend has she gets really cold. She buys these really thin, they're cotton. You can get them at Claire's or whatever. Just really thin, kind of cheap gloves. She takes those and cuts the fingertips off because she works on the computer all day. So you're covering most of your hand, but you can still kind of touch the computer and whatever you need to touch with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I just wanted to get back to, that jacket that you showed earlier.
Yeah.
I I for many years didn't wear a jacket because I lost my mobility, like if I'm in the car or whatever. And it's a pain for me to like put the jacket on and off. So like if I knew I was just going to the store, I would kind of load up on layers. And then, something that I knew I could move in well. Well, I ended up getting one of those jackets like you have. Mine's a Scott brand. But they're great because they're very light. They're super easy to put on. They're extremely warm, and they don't restrict your movement as much as like a thick, heavier coat does. That's not great for like laying down in the snow, but like if you're just going out to the store or whatever, those coats are great for that kind of stuff.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that's so true. I was going to say that the technology that people have now for, doing, lightweight camping, adventure racing, all the stuff that we do for my sports side of things is incredibly helpful for people with locomotor disability. So the developments that have gone on in the last 10 years in terms of outdoor gear is just unbelievable, as you pointed out. Like the weight of this, a jacket that used to do the same thing as this was like 5 times heavier, even 10 years ago. Another thing too, as you pointed out, is layering is really important. So I've got an old jacket that's like 30 years old that, I used to wear when I went out, and you'd put it on, but it was like so heavy, you couldn't even lift your arms. I mean, I don't have FSH, so my arms work, but if I had FSH, like you say, you'd feel like you were weighed down. It was so darn heavy. So if you layer, for example, this is another example of, this is a Solomon jacket. So you can almost see through it. It's so light. This thing will fold up almost in your pocket. It's so small. Now, when I was hiking in the Sierras with my daughter, it went down to -8 one night. And so I had this on, and then I put this lightweight jacket on top of it. And that was almost as much as those big, huge, heavy jackets that I used to wear in terms of the benefits. So the nice thing about this is that it provides you with some wind resistance, so you don't get the wind going through. And you put that and couple it with one of these ultralight jackets, and that is, you could probably go down to -20 with these two things, and if you're out and about and you'd stay warm. So layering is really important. And the two of these things, not even 6 ounces. It's crazy how lightweight stuff is now. So this is a Solomon, S-A-L. I'll just show you here. Where's the, so Solomon. So Solomon has some really great equipment, uber lightweight, good quality. And look around too, the stuff often goes on sale too. So in Canada, if you're from Canada, the best place to look for top end stuff like this for a good price is called The Last Hunt. If anyone's from Canada, Last Hunt. It's often on for 50 or 60% off. There'll be a little imperfection and they throw it there, and who cares if the color is a little bit off. You still get the top quality stuff. Good, so definitely layering is important. I really like vests. So vests are so important, as June pointed out. Keeping that core warm is just as important as keeping the head warm. And I'm just such a huge fan of vests. And like I say, they've got so many of these uber lightweight vests out there too that have the down in them. And they're easy to slip on too, because they're so light. If you can't lift your arms up because you have FSH, you could get your arms in there and swing it up because it's so lightweight. So it's quite easy to get on one of these very lightweight vests as well. Keep that core warm. Now, does anyone use a motorized wheelchair on this call?
I do.
Yeah, so one of the things, yeah, go ahead, Robin. Yeah, so just a couple of notes about that. In the winter, be careful, because I've driven around, I'm up in Collingwood or skiing or whatever, or just driving around, and I see folks in the wintertime in a motorized wheelchair. And my goodness, it's scary because number one, what happens is when your battery gets cold, remember that the life of that battery drops like a stone, which is why Teslas aren't great when we're up here in Canada and it's -25 out. So as a battery gets cold, there's an exponential loss of the power. So just be really careful, because we sure don't want anyone to go out there and your battery, which normally you think, okay, go half an hour, I'm going to run out of gas in half an hour. You run out of gas in 10 minutes with your battery in the wintertime. So the battery life drops exponentially. Number two, be careful of the wheels too, because I've had, patients come in and their wheels are totally bald and they're driving down a street with snow on it with bald tires. So make sure that your tires are, pumped up well, make sure that they're good quality. And I don't know, maybe someone on the call can inform me. Can you get snow tires or a better grip on your tires for a motorized wheelchair? I'd imagine you can. But just like we change our tires in our car, you should try and upgrade your tires for the wintertime and at least make sure that they're, good quality. You haven't really burned through the tread, because if you've got no tread on them, you're just going to spin. And I don't want somebody to get stuck out there on the sidewalk somewhere.
I wanted to make a comment on the clothing discussion.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I'm backtracking to that. And that is, as a female, I have a hell of a time doing anything that requires me to put my arms through sleeves. And I wear ponchos. I've got a poncho on right now. This is a merino wool poncho. So all I have to do is get it over my head. And so I am constantly layering inside and out. I've got a turtleneck and a shirt and a poncho. So the ponchos to me are, again, it's more a women's style thing, but you can get them in every color. I have like practically every color of the book, but they come in cashmere wool or merino wool. And I just recommend that as one more layering option that really adds a lot of warmth without a lot of work and difficulty to get it on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly pullover sweaters are just a bear for, all of our patients, in particular FSH. It's just, really hard to get into them. So that's a great suggestion. And that's where these things with a zipper are much easier than putting on a heavy sweater, which I find just really is not very practical for most people and not the best option. You're going to get far more warmth from this. And then if you need a little bit more, put a lightweight layer on like this. But poncho is a wonderful example. And I've seen ponchos too that are made out of down as well. I've seen some folks at ski races, when you're standing around, just putting them on. So there's some interesting options there too. Again, I don't know the brands off the top of my head, but I have seen some poncho type, down-filled things as well. A couple of other things too. Try to stay hydrated, because when you're dehydrated, what happens is you decrease the blood flow to your hands and feet, and they're going to get cold faster. So stay hydrated before you go out. There is, in addition to the thermic effect of food, there is a little bit of what we call thermic effect, which means that you generate more heat from caffeine. So, having a nice warm coffee, tea, cocoa sort of thing before you're going to go out in the cold will help, one, to keep you hydrated. And number two, also, it does have a bit of a thermic effect as well. So keep that in mind. If you are really cold, it's probably just like me, human aging. And people with FSH, of course, as the muscle mass decreases, you're going to be more prone to the cold. But do check, every couple of years at least, your thyroid hormone, or if suddenly you become very cold intolerant, because hypothyroidism or low thyroid is reasonably common in the general population. And again, you don't want to throw gasoline on a fire that's already burning, because if you become hypothyroid, you are going to be so much more cold intolerant, and it's an easy fix to get that treated. So, see your doctor if you find that you're particularly cold intolerant, and get checked for your thyroid hormone, because the thyroid hormone really kickstarts metabolism. So when it's low, people are extremely cold. That's one of the classic features of hypothyroidism. And I think those are all the little points that I had from all my experience with outdoor sports and stuff. But certainly if there's specific questions or, anything else related to FSH, actually, we didn't introduce who I am. I'm a clinician scientist. I did my PhD in cell biology and metabolism, and I've been very interested in the metabolism of disorders, both primary metabolic disorders, but also disorders that affect muscle atrophy. And what we know is that myotonic dystrophy type 1, FSH muscular dystrophy, normal human aging process, mitochondrial disease, and sporadic IBM all share common features which cause the muscles to shrink. which is what we're trying to target with some of our therapeutics. And that is inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction. The mitochondria is the part of our cell that converts food into energy, and also something called oxidative stress. And those two are related. So when the mitochondria don't work, they release factors which activate inflammation. They also release more what are called free radicals, which is what the antioxidants are used to mop up. And there was some great work almost 20 years ago from a French group, which showed that one of the defects in FSH is that when the myoblasts, which are your muscle cells, normally they fuse together to make a mature muscle, it was oxidative stress which seemed to be impairing that ability. And so they went on to do a clinical trial with some antioxidants, which I think are definitely suboptimal ones. I would not have chosen them, but still it worked. Did show some improvements in 2-minute walk test and arm function and FSH dystrophy with antioxidants. So we and others, are following up on that. We have a different approach where we're trying to activate mitochondria, lower inflammation, and lower oxidative stress through a variety of different nutraceutical approaches, as well as targeted exercise for FSH. So I see about 250 patients or so with FSH. I've been following patients now for 30 years in my residency, 27 years now as a clinician. We run the largest clinic in Canada. We have about 500 mitochondrial patients and about 200 IBM patients. I run the Duchenne clinic. So we're looking for any and all strategies to improve muscle function, keep muscle bulk up, but more importantly, keep function up, keep people functionally as well as they can with different types of muscular dystrophy and metabolic disorders. So that's what I do in a nutshell, and hope to do much more interesting stuff in FSH in the next year or so. We've got a few papers coming out. As I mentioned, the preservation of function with exercise paper will be coming out. We're working on a paper right now with my daughter, who just finished university and is working as a research assistant, where what we found in all types of MD, especially FSH, that there's a disproportionate amount of body fat in the trunk region. And so what people appear when they get measured at the doctor, they say, oh, you're fine, your body mass index is perfect. But when we actually measure body fat, we find that a lot of our patients are meeting the criteria for obesity. And that's a big issue because that's extra weight you don't need, and it increases the risk for cardiometabolic disease like heart attacks, fatty liver disease, et cetera. So I think, people are being led into this false security that everything's great when your BMI looks good. And so we're working on that huge paper right now to hopefully educate folks that, just getting your body mass index done is not adequate for people with muscular dystrophy. And we need a better assessment of body composition, which is something that we're working for.
I'm interested in the oxidative distress and what you're doing about that. That sounds very interesting to me. That's something that anyone of any physical capability could potentially be involved in improving themselves.
Yeah, so oxidative stress is essentially what happens. There's a variety of ways in which these things called free radicals are formed. And what free radicals do is they damage lipids in our body, they damage cell membranes in our body, they damage DNA, and they can damage protein. And so we have a host of antioxidants naturally in our body that help us to defend against these free radicals, we call them. However, in FSH dystrophy and many other dystrophies that we see, they're produced in excess, and they're even thought to be part of human aging. And so in our lab, we've identified that there's multiple sites of production, and we've identified different combinations of antioxidants that we've been prescribing for years, and we've proven in patients with mitochondrial disease that it lowers oxidative stress. And so for probably 15 years now, and based on the work that came out of the French group, for our patients, we recommend what's called coenzyme Q10, vitamin E, and something called creatine monohydrate. So that and another antioxidant called alpha lipoic acid forms.
Put that in the chat, please. And how much per kilo or pound of human?
Yep. So what we can do would probably be the easiest. I'm just thinking, June, should I send that to you? I've got our paper, which shows that we were in humans able to lower oxidative stress in a disorder called mitochondrial disease, where it's even more of an issue. So if we can do it there, we can sure do it in FSH. And we've been giving this to our patients for 15 years. So it's called coenzyme Q10, alpha lipoic acid, vitamin E, and creatine. But I can give you the paper and the doses, and not sure what the best way of doing it is. If I gave it to June, if she could share that with you, or what we can do is we could.
So you can share it with me, and we have actually an email list that goes around to actually everybody who's in this Wellness Hour group.
Okay, good. Let's do that.
What do you not have for overdose? I mean, if you get too much calcium, it screws with your heart and your bones and whatever. So that's what I mean.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and these are the sort of things that would be very difficult to overdose because they have a wide therapeutic range because they're natural substances in our body. And number two, we've calculated what the appropriate dose is, even for, very severe disorders. And we've, used this now for 30 years from newborn infants with severe mitochondrial disease right up to 92-year-olds with normal human aging, showing it's got a huge spectrum of safety. And we know what the side effects are and how to mitigate them, which are pretty much just gastrointestinal upset. But of course, one should follow the guidelines that we set because I suppose it would be possible. If a little bit's good, too much is not always better and sometimes can be deleterious. So it'd be very difficult to overdose on these things. And I think people would be limited by their tummy upset if they tried to take too much of it. But of course, we'll give you the range of these.
I wanted to ask June and Dr. Tarnopolsky. I think you explained this in what was the name of that session on nutrition and exercise that you drove a couple of months ago. I believe that there you mentioned all these things about creatinine and CoQ10 or creatine and the doses. So maybe, I don't know, instead of making you work more, I don't know if that session was recorded, June. Maybe you can just share the link to that.
It's on our YouTube channel. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes. So that should be there.
And there was another question. I wanted to make sure we didn't miss it. Going back to the garments for staying warm, you mentioned boots, and she said, are there any lightweight boots? I guess some of the heavy winter boots might be a little challenging for them.
Yeah, so certainly the materials have improved dramatically in the last 10 or 15 years. Again, people that are doing outdoor races and these sports want lighter material, but they still want the warmth. So the quality now of boots and their weight, so quality's gone up and weight's come down big time. But definitely shop around. I would definitely take a look at to see whether the brand of boots you have this Ice FX on the bottom, the anti-slip, or if you get a really great pair of boots that you like, try the Yak Tracks on top of them because that's going to be almost as good. But I actually tried these boots out one time, the Ice FX, and they're very amazing. It's such an ingenious thing. They put little tiny shards of glass in, and it just helps it to grip on ice. It was a really ingenious thing. I wish I got the patent on that. That was smart.
Very interesting. They might make good weapons in a pinch too. Kick somebody.
Hopefully that'll never come to that.
Yeah, I just wanted a quick follow-up on those boots with the glass shards. How do those work then on marble floors when you get inside?
Yeah, so the nice thing about those is that the metal is really hard and it doesn't have give, whereas these sort of retract up. So when you stand on a floor, the rubber will actually sink down and grip. So they're kind of interesting because they're definitely, I walked around Mark's work warehouse in them on the slippery floor there, and it was amazing. I had really good grip. But when you go onto ice, it grips as well. So it's kind of neat that it almost retracts when you step on the thing. But definitely be careful of these things inside. Put a rubber thing on there, and Yak Tracks, take them off when you go in. But great question.
All right. Well, we have come to the end of our hour. Hard to believe. This was so interesting. And thank you so much. I mean, you're wonderfully prepared. I love all the props, all the things that you have to share with us. It's always incredibly helpful. I think people really appreciate having specific tried and true brands and products to look up and try out. And of course, I think in our email thread and when we post this on the blog, if all of you have other favorite products that you've tried that work for you, please share them there as well. So any final questions, comments from anybody?
Just that this Thursday, Dr. Stadlin in Kansas City is going to give a webinar at 1 on updates on clinical trials related to FSH.
Oh, yes, thanks. Thank you for the advertising. And actually tomorrow evening, 8:30 Eastern time, we have a Zoom group for parents of, it's called the Early Onset Parents Roundtable. So this is parents, if you have children who were, affected with FSHD, it's a great group for you. But Scott Harper will be speaking there because he's been working on gene therapies, and obviously for children who are affected with FSHD, that's kind of the ideal patient for that type of therapy where, we're still some years off, but it's being used in other conditions, including neuromuscular diseases. And it's, we are hoping soon there'll be a prospect for trials in FSHD. So it's really important to activate parents because we need a lot more data on children in order for these trials to go forward. There's got to be better natural history data and just awareness, and of course children grow up, so we need to keep replenishing that, the group of parents are very activated. So that's meeting tomorrow night on Zoom if you're interested in just hearing about gene therapies. And so, all right. Well, with that,
You want to mention what's going to go on in the next December?
oh, why don't you, Rick? You're on.
Well, I was doing it in the half hour before this started, and it's just to let everybody know to think about how they might like the Wellness Hour to go forward in the next year. Maybe there are topics that we haven't covered, but the concept generally is maybe breakout rooms for specific interests, or something even like another day for a wellness hour similar to the women's wellness hour. There could be a different day, a different hour for maybe all concerned about wheelchairs or pain or something. Anyway, there'll be a poll. And so it'll be a chance to have your thoughts expressed. And maybe we can address that in the year to come, and maybe breakout rooms a little better organized might be good, or even possibly another wellness hour at a different time, different day, similar to the women's hour.
And can I add also that if you have not sent your email address in, and we don't have the capability of sending anything out to you, if you'll direct message me, this is Renee, with your email so that we can get you on that list, because there's a lot of good information that does go out to folks on that, both of those email lists that June spoke of.
Yeah, I think everybody who has logged in, I believe that we're able to capture your email addresses, and obviously you can opt in, opt out on getting those emails, but it's a great way to keep the conversation going and exchange additional valuable information within this group. So, great. So we look forward to seeing you in December. I think many of you, if you're in the US, will be celebrating Thanksgiving. So early happy Thanksgiving. I think Canada has already had their Canadian Thanksgiving, but we'll wish you well anyway. And so, Mark, thank you so much for meeting with us today, brother.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Great
Mark.
to see you all.
Thank you.
We'll see you next
Bye.
time.
Thank you.
Bye.